Welcome to Dre TV.
Welcome to you all at home.
You've still got a chance to win this race, haven't you?
Just drive. I wanna be the only one to make it through the
Hey folks, Dre back at it once again with a brand new episode of Dre TV for you. Welcome to episode 9. Hope you enjoyed my creative little intro. Apparently I aged about 15 years in the space of 30 seconds. In the meantime, we have a review of what might be the craziest race in modern Formula 1 history with the 2014 Canadian Grand Prix, as well as a look back at the Italian Grand Prix for MotoGP, and an extended Ask Dre segment because you guys had a lot of things to ask me after that Grand Prix as my ice cream truck goes off outside, but we'll ignore that. Also have a look at the Castrol GP stand-ins as well. So, in the meantime, here is what might be the craziest race we've seen in modern times in Formula 1, the 2014 Canadian Grand Prix. So F1 returned to Canada, but it was a familiar situation at the top. The two Mercedes dominant by 2/3 of a second around the circuit Gilles Villeneuve, but to most people's surprise, it was Nico Rosberg on pole, with Lewis Hamilton having a scruffy lap for second, with Sebastian Vettel taking third from Valtteri Bottas by just 0.02 of a second. At that speed, that's just 16 centimetres between the two of them. Felipe Massa and Daniel Ricciardo made up row 3. Anyone questioning Nico Rosberg's fight in this championship needs to see lap 1, where he had pretty much barged Hamilton off the road and took the lead to start, and Sebastian Vettel had nipped his way into second place as a result. However, the two Mauritians hit each other on turn 3, and after 25 races, Max Chilton suffered his first Formula 1 retirement. Sad times. Chilton was given a 3-place grid drop for causing the collision, and the safety car was out after just 30 seconds. After the oil was cleaned up, we went racing again, and Hamilton quickly retook Vettel under DRS, the Red Bulls giving up 15 miles an hour to the Mercedes down the straights, and the Mercedes ended up doing what they normally do and take off into the distance. After the first round of pit stops, Red Bull looked good for third until Vettel was caught behind Nico Hülkenberg, who was one stopping, and with Red Bull's massive speed deficit, he just could not find the way through, and as a result, he brought Bottas, Massa and Ricciardo into play behind, generating a 4-car train. But things got really interesting when both Mercedes up front suffered from MGSU failures at the same time, crippling both their cars, and they were losing time at a rate of 2 seconds or so a lap. Meanwhile, Hamilton was getting closer and closer for a move into the lead, and when he had a first true crack at it, Rosberg outbroke himself and cut the final chicane, maintaining his lead. He was given a final warning by the stewards, but no penalty. After the second and final pit stops for most of the field, Ricciardo had jumped Vettel on the undercut, and Perez was the new Force India blockade with Ricciardo and Vettel still behind, unable to pass due to the speed disadvantage they both had. But then all hell broke loose as Lewis Hamilton behind had cut the final chicane himself in what turned out to be a rear brake failure, retiring him from the Grand Prix. By now, Felipe Massa had switched to a 2-stop strategy and was gunning down the leading pack, as Sergio Perez in second now had caught right back up to Rosberg, but Rosberg's pace in sectors 1 and 2 was still so good that he was able to maintain a 1-second lead until the closing stages. By now, Felipe Massa had caught back up to the leading pack after multiple purple lap times, but he now had a problem. Despite fresher rubber, a combination of Ricciardo's DRS and draft, alongside some superb defensive driving from Sebastian Vettel, had somehow kept Massa at bay. 5 laps to go, and suddenly Sergio Perez made a mistake down the main straight, and Daniel Ricciardo had gotten through Perez at last. He quickly maximised the Red Bull's superior pace, and finally, with just 2 laps to go, nailed Rosberg at the final chicane to take the lead. Further back, 2 superb performances were about to count for nothing, as on the final lap, in a desperation move, Felipe Massa and Sergio Perez collided before turn 1, both cars hitting the walls at over 150 miles an hour. Luckily, both drivers were able to walk out okay, Massa's wreckage narrowly avoiding Sebastian Vettel's Red Bull in what was arguably Seb's first bit of good luck so far this season. There was a safety car declared, effectively ending the Grand Prix, so as a result, Daniel Ricciardo took his first ever career victory after 57 races and just his 7th with Red Bull Racing. A superhuman effort from Nico Rosberg kept his streak of consecutive podiums alive to 7, finishing in 2nd place. Sebastian Vettel took home his 2nd podium of the season in 3rd. Further back after the carnage, Jenson Button had probably the quietest 4th place in the history of Formula 1. Nico Hülkenberg continues his run of 7 straight points finishes in 5th, only the 2nd man in the whole field to have scored points at every Grand Prix so far this season. Alongside, obviously, Fernando Alonso as well, who had a very quiet in 6th place. Bottas in 7th after hitting suspension problems later on. John-Eric Verne finally gets a points finish in 8th place. Kevin Magnussen was back in the points in 9th, and Kimi Raikkonen finished a miserable weekend with the final point in 10th. Amazingly, he was the final finisher, as Sauber's Adrian Sutil was so off the pace, he was a lap down in 13th, failing to pass Massa and Perez as his race ended on lap 69. In the Drivers' Championship, Nico Rosberg extends his championship lead to 22 points, ahead of Lewis Hamilton, 140 to 118. Daniel Ricciardo jumps up to 3rd with 79 points, Alonso now 4th with 69 points, and Vettel 5th with 60. A superb weekend for Red Bull Racing took 22 points out of Mercedes Constructors' Championship stranglehold, reducing the lead to a mere 119 points. To put that into perspective for you, if Lewis Hamilton took the season off, Mercedes would still be leading the Constructors' Championship by a point. Mercedes with 258, Red Bull with 139, Ferrari still 3rd with 87, Force India 4th with 77, and McLaren up to 5th with 66 over Williams 58. For me, Canada 2014 will go down as one of the most chaotic and exciting races ever. For once, Mercedes looked fuming, and it threw open the entire form book, and the contrast in strategy from the top runners added some tense and close racing, and the drama of the last 20 laps or so, and pretty much everything beyond Hamilton's retirement has to be seen to be believed. It's the first 10 out of 10 for me. It took a little while to get going, but Canada 2011 had its dull spots too. A must-see race and a contender for Race of the Decade. Fun fact, that was probably the longest race review I think that actually is the longest race review I've ever written for this show. Just under 1,000 words there, hence why it went on a little bit longer than they normally do. But there was so much action in that Grand Prix, especially in the second half, that these things just go on for a long time. Also, I know people have asked me about when the power rankings are coming back. The reason I'm not doing them after every Grand Prix is 1, because I missed a big chunk anyway, and 2, because power rankings aren't going to change very much after races unless something dramatic happens. Especially now, we kind of now have a rough idea of what the field is looking like now. So if I had to make one up right now, I would probably say Mercedes, Red Bull, probably Ferrari just about over Williams, maybe the other way around. I'd have to think long and hard, but between Ferrari and Williams for 3rd. Force India probably in 5th, because they're not consistently up there yet. Ahead of McLaren in 6th, Toro Rosso 7th, then I would say Lotus 8th, Sauber 9th, and then Marussia over Caterham for the battle for P10. I've knocked Sauber below Lotus because Sauber just look awful. At least Lotus have scored some points and are looking half decent when they're actually running their cars now. Sauber just look miserable. They have the worst finishing rate of any team in the field. They were a lap down in Canada. There were only 10 finishers in Canada, yet the Saubers still didn't score a point. Their team is looking really, really miserably bad right now, and that's probably the reason why I have them this far down. in the meantime, let's talk about the Castrol GP League, the GP Predictor. There's a Dre TV League as always, and there's been some changes. I mean, obviously because of the carnage that took place in Canada, the field went all topsy-turvy. Quite frankly, if you scored more than 30 points this past GP, you probably did quite well for yourself. Race by race, I can tell you right now, the highest scorer of the week was Jack Zeno with 67 points. Matt Ballard with 62, and Ben Dyer there with 54 as well. But overall, we have a new leader. It's actually Joshua Suttil with 461 points, leading the way ahead of Henry Arvelainen, that gets knocked down to second place with 457, just 4 points behind, and Joe McMillan's still hanging in there in third with 447. He's a new guy. He's just joined the league, obviously. So obviously the highest score at the end of the season will chip in. Also, noticing as well, I'm actually been knocked down to 9th place now. And I am no longer top YouTuber because Arav is now 1 point ahead of me. With 412 to my 411. And shout out to my girl Van Dana there in 10th place as well. I am back ahead of you. Suck it. That's our personal rivalry we got going on right now as well. So, like I said, the top 3 runners at the end of the season will win a Harrison 101 t-shirt. They're coming out very, very soon, by the way. I'm nearly done. I'm going to celebrate that with 5,000. When I get to 5,000 subscribers, I think I'll release the t-shirt. And the overall winner will get a copy of F1 2014 on the console of their choice. Now, that's out of the way, let's take on Ask Dre. Hello everybody and welcome to Ask Dre, the segment of the show where you ask me questions. This is going to be an extended Ask Dre this week because you guys had a lot to ask me after that Grand Prix, for obvious reasons. Friggin' ice cream truck. I don't know if you can hear it in the background or not, but yeah, it's a bit irritating. We'll soldier on. Anyway, a lot of questions you guys had to ask because obviously Canada was so exciting and so many different things you could take away from that Grand Prix. But first up, a question not to do with Canada. And that's from Patrick Casey, who asked, what was your first experience with motorsports and what made you become a fan? My first experience of motorsport, I think, I'm going back a long way here, by the way. I think it was the time when Michael Schumacher broke his legs at Silverstone in that Ferrari accident he had. I think it was 1999. I'm not 100% sure. It's either 98 or 99 the year. I think it's 99. And it was the year that Eddie Irvine had half a chance of winning the championship in Schumacher's place. And Hakkinen ended up winning the title there. That was my first real memory of Formula 1. It was my dad that got me into motorsports. My dad was a big F1 fan and a big MotoGP fan. And as I got older, I started watching it with him. And as a result, I ended up loving the sports I ended up enjoying now. It was Schumacher's Ferrari, which I fell in love with when I was a child. And it was actually Kenny Roberts Jr. in his Suzuki, which I adored as well back in the time when I started growing up as a fan as well. So, yeah, it was those two things that really stuck out in my mind, like in the late 90s, early 2000 kind of time, that I started getting into motorsport. So, in case you're always curious about that one, there you go. Jack Zeno asks, do you think it was fair to give Perez a grid penalty for Austria? It kind of goes hand in hand with Joe McMillan asking, do you think it was fair that Perez was punished for the accident on the final lap, or do you think it was more of a racing incident? They're kind of asking me pretty much the same thing. So, shout out to both of you guys. Thanks for the questions. It's tough to say, really. Yes, Perez went off the racing line, but at the same time, he was only trying to defend from Felipe Massa's attack, and I don't think Perez knew just how close Massa was to his car at the time. I mean, it's always been a common thing that's been said that wing mirrors on Formula 1 cars are useless, so he probably didn't have a clue where Massa's car was in relation to him, and I think all Perez was doing was trying to defend the place. I've never seen a car that's been punished in Formula 1 for going off the racing line. It's basically a fancy way of saying causing a collision, really, isn't it? I suspect the impact of the accident probably almost forced the stewards into making a call to punish somebody. If this was like a minor accident, which didn't have that much of an effect on anybody, then quite possibly they may have been able to get away with it. But the fact that it was such a massive accident, Perez hitting the wall at 27G at 150 plus miles an hour, and Massa almost hitting Vettel afterwards as well. I think the stewards probably had the idea of, we've got to punish somebody here, and if they were going to punish somebody, it was probably going to be Perez for going off the racing line. But I really think it was a 51-49 kind of move. It was the final lap. Maybe a little bit of discretion wouldn't hurt, because you're going to go for it. It's the final lap after all. So I think it's a little bit harsh to really punish him for that. But if they were going to punish somebody, it probably would have been Perez. I don't think Massa had any real hand in that. Also, I was kind of disappointed to see that Force India acted really bitchy about the whole thing on their Twitter page. Which is a shame, because I actually like Force India a lot. They seem like a really nice team, nice folks, good social media account, likeable drivers in Hülkenberg and Perez normally. Bit disappointing. But yeah, I think it was a 51-49 in favour of Perez, for whose fault was it, but I think it was very harsh to give him a 5-place grid drop. I think giving him a slap on the wrist and saying, look, don't do that again, I think would have probably gone down better in my eyes, but that's just me. Danny Brennan, 72 on Twitter, asks, are Ferrari able to stay third in the Constructors' Championship with Williams and Force India making progress in Canada? Hard to say. Again, I don't think this was ever going to be a Ferrari track because of how Canada is. It's such a high-speed track, and Ferrari are lacking power compared to the Mercedes-powered cars. Well, everybody's lacking power in comparison to the Mercedes-powered cars. So this was always going to be a track where Force India and Williams were going to be strong. Ferrari losing speed meant Alonso just had an average Grand Prix in 6th, and Raikkonen was the last guy to actually finish in 10th place, which is really disappointing and, you know, not... My phone's going off now. Really not very Ferrari-like, you could say. So there's a chance, but I think Ferrari will be stronger at other tracks. I just think that Canada was kind of like a microcosm for Mercedes power. So I think Ferrari will be stronger elsewhere. I think they'll have to struggle for the next couple of Grand Prix because Austria is actually very similar to Canada in terms of nature of the track, but we'll have to wait and see. BPG13 asking, do you think Massa and Perez will be rivals for the season after that accident? Maybe, maybe not. Felipe Massa is the kind of guy that likes to hold a grudge, like his feud with Hamilton in 2011. So there's definitely a possibility there, I would say. Maybe, we'll have to wait and see. It is two hothead South Americans after all. We'll have to wait and see. Tom Bardsley on Facebook asking, do you think Massa would have won the race or had more of a chance of winning the race if Williams had kept him on a one-stop? Definitely. I'm going to be honest here, Felipe Massa really should have won that Grand Prix. I think the biggest guy that got screwed in this race was Sebastian Vettel, after being stuck behind Nico Hülkenberg, who was one-stopping. It ruined his race. It allowed Ricciardo to catch up and then you know, use the overcut to get out ahead and do the damage, and him being lead Red Bull was always going to help out massively in this kind of situation where you were stuck behind a faster car. But Felipe Massa could have easily one-stopped and probably would have won, and even after two-stopping he really should have cleared the Red Bulls, who were so much slower in a straight line. But it was some great defensive driving from Vettel which enabled Massa to stay behind, and by that point the race was already over pretty much, and Ricciardo had got through on the Perez brake issue but made a mistake, and Ricciardo with his better straight line speed and obviously better tyres was able to get through Rosberg in the end. But Massa probably really should have won, and I'm actually quite disappointed he didn't, as it goes in the end. But yeah, you know, that's how these things turn out in Formula 1 sometimes. Do you think Mercedes will win in Austria? The circuit is slightly similar to Canada with all the straights, in my opinion, from Richard Evans. Yeah, I think it'll be business as usual anyway. It could be any track and Mercedes will probably be favourites, but given that it's Austria, another very high-speed track, another one of a lot of lengthy straights and a very high average speed, it's probably going to go down to Mercedes again. They'll be back to their winning ways for sure, unless there's another mechanical retirement of some kind, like Hamilton had during the Grand Prix now. So I think what happened in terms of pace around Canada will probably be quite similar in Austria as well. James Francis White asks, if Haas chooses to buy a current team, which one would be the best option? Probably Caterham, because they're probably going to be the cheapest. We all know Formula 1 is not an expensive, well, it's not a cheap sport to really get into, as it is. So, if you can buy Caterham at a discounted rate, if they really are quitting at the end of the season, which is a strong rumour right now that Caterham are pulling out at the end of the season, now that Mauricio has scored points, and that's almost guaranteed Caterham to not score this season, to be stuck to 11th place. Haas might feel the best way is to buy an existing team, just transfer all the staff, and build a base in the United Kingdom, or use their current facilities and just go from there rather than starting from scratch in America. That might be the better way to go. Maybe Sauber, if they really do have issues that are that deep, because Sauber might have better resources to use as well. We'll have to wait and see. Gigi Garley asking, is Hamilton's championship over? Absolutely not. You got to remember, Hamilton started the season 25 points off Rosberg because he had the retirement in Australia. Hamilton had caught him up by winning the next 4 races and had overtaken Rosberg again in terms of the championship. So Hamilton's already done it once, let alone the fact we've got a double point race to end the season in Abu Dhabi. So if Hamilton can do it once, he can easily do it again, I would say. And I still think he's the strongest of the 2 Mercedes drivers. It's just Rosberg has the momentum right now. So, these things change on a dime, but I think that Hamilton will catch up again, I'm sure of it. It's just Hamilton's been a little bit unlucky in comparison to Rosberg. Rosberg's had a perfect car pretty much from start to finish, while Hamilton's had 2 mechanical retirements, costing him at least, I would say, 36 points if it was 2 second places, maybe as much as 50. So you have to wait and see how these things go on. Owen Quemby asking, do you think Nico deserved the penalty in Canada for missing the final chicane? I would say no. I think the smallest penalty the stewards can give out is a 5-second time penalty. Given how close the Mercedes were over the entire Grand Prix, there'd be a strong possibility that giving Rosberg a penalty of any kind would kill any chance of him winning the Grand Prix. So I think the stewards were right to get on the radio and give Rosberg a warning and say, look, don't do that again. I don't think it cost Hamilton too much time. I think it cost him about a second in the end. I don't think it was a penalty that was worth giving out for the sake of a 1 second time penalty, like over the advantage of cutting the chicane. So I think it was probably the right thing to do. I don't think Rosberg deserved the penalty for that one. It would have been very, very harsh, in my opinion. Not to mention, drivers were cutting that chicane all weekend. So it just became a braking thing, I think, more than anything else. These new cars are light when it comes to the brake-by-wire system and things like that. Len asks, I think it's Len Morrison on Twitter, asks, does another mediocre performance by Ferrari suggest Alonso must leave in order to pursue a 3rd title, and if so, where? Yeah, I'm inclined to think that Alonso's buggered, really. And the reason why he's buggered is that Ferrari are not going to give him a title-winning car. It's been 5 years now. This is the 6th season since Ferrari last won the Constructors in 2008 with Felipe Massa and Kimi Raikkonen. Ferrari has not given him a title-winning car since then, and I have no reason to suggest that they will do so again anytime soon. Ferrari just don't develop well enough, and they don't have the best car out of the box. So I think Alonso is buggered. The issue is that where does he go? I mean, Red Bull looks pretty set in terms of driver lineup. Mercedes looks pretty set. And every other team is worse on paper. I mean, Force India haven't got the money to bring him in. McLaren have the money to bring him in, but McLaren are still a long way away from where they really need to be. Lotus are dead in the water and with no money. So if Alonso does leave, where's he going to go? That's the problem. I think he now just has to ride this situation out and hope for the best, which is not good if you're a 2-time world champion so desperate to make it free, which is just kind of unfortunate, really. And finally, Nathan Green asking, can Red Bull continue their winning ways in Austria? Probably not. A lot of shit had to happen for Red Bull to win that Grand Prix. Massa botched his strategy with the Williams team. Mercedes had a car crippling problem and still nearly won the Grand Prix with Rosberg. So I mean, Red Bull are a little bit closer than where they were earlier in the season. I'd still say they're about 5 or 6 tenths behind where Red Bull really need to be in order to challenge Mercedes properly. Well, I will say, though, that Helmut Marko did say that Red Bull did get a big engine update for Austria, so maybe it'll make a difference, but I doubt it. I don't think Renault didn't win immediately when they started powering Red Bull either, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But thanks everybody there for all your questions. That was a bit of a grind, but we got there in the end. To wrap up this episode, we're going to have a look at the MotoGP race weekend from Mugello. Valentino Rossi's 300th Grand Prix, and could Marc Marquez make it 6 in a row? MotoGP headed back to Italy for round 6 of the championship, and Marc Marquez continued his incredible perfect season with his 6th straight pole position, but to everyone's surprise, a stunning lap from Andrea Iannone had put him 2nd, just a 10th behind Marquez. Jorge Lorenzo rounded off the front row in 3rd, while Valentino Rossi started 10th. So as the race began, to the surprise of absolutely no one, Andrea Iannone with another brilliant start gave him the whole shot into turn 1, but Jorge Lorenzo quickly dispatched of him to take the early lead in vintage Lorenzo fashion. Marquez had slipped to 3rd for the moment, but quickly passed Iannone for 2nd in an attempt to chase down a hard gun in Lorenzo. Valentino Rossi had already carved through the field, and within 3 laps he himself had ended up 3rd in what was one of the best 2 laps of the opening season so far. Meanwhile, Cal Crutchlow continued his wretched run of form by low-siding the bike into Sector 1, and in some horrific luck, his bike slid and collided with Stefan Bradl's LCR Honda, causing him to have his 2nd big accident in as many days. Luckily, both riders were okay. Bradley Smith had also fallen a lap prior. Up the front, Marquez had decided to stay alongside Lorenzo as the laps wound on, with Rossi just tagging along about a 2nd behind in 3rd, with Andrea Iannone slipping back to the 2nd group of Dani Pedrosa, Pol Espargaro and Andrea Dovizioso. Dovi and Iannone had a superb back and forth exchange, with Pedrosa just about winning the war in the latter stages, Iannone's fading tyres the culprits. But at the front, Marquez had decided to pull the pin with 7 laps to go in a similar move to Argentina, passing Lorenzo at 215 miles an hour into turn 1 under braking, but Lorenzo this time wasn't going to roll over in a terrific dogfight over the final laps, Rossi staying with the front 2 in case of an error. But once again, Marquez just had that little bit more, had another clutch final lap where he would not give Lorenzo an inch, and he would take the checkered flag just a 10th of a second ahead of Jorge Lorenzo in 2nd, in what was a superb battle, with Valentino Rossi celebrating his 300th Grand Prix just 2 seconds back in 3rd. Marquez has now won half the MotoGP races he's ever entered, with his 12th win in just 24 races. Further back, Dani Pedrosa finished 4th, 14 seconds off his own teammate. Pol Espargaro continued his great run of recent form in 5th, and in the Battle of the Ducatis, Andrea Dovizioso just beat his namesake Iannone for a 10th for 6th place. Bautista rode a very lonely race in 8th, Alicia Spargaro was top CRT in 9th, and Yoni Hernandez had his first top 10 finish since Sepang 2013 in 10th. Marquez's perfect season continues, and his championship lead now stands at 53 points, from Valentino Rossi in 2nd, a point ahead of Pedrosa in 3rd with 96. Lorenzo overtakes Dovi into 4th place, but is now a whopping 85 points back from Marquez already. Season over? In Moto2, Tito Rabat came back with a calculated ride to take the win ahead of continuing to impress rookie field of Luis Salom in 2nd place, and Jonas Volger secured his first podium in Moto2 in 3rd. GB's own Sam Lowes finished in 8th after qualifying on the front row ahead of Maverick Vinales. Rabat now has a 22-point lead in the Moto2 Championship from his teammate Mika Kallio, with Maverick Vinales and Dominique Agata joint third with 69 points each. In Moto3, carnage again. This time it was Romano Fenati that triumphed in a pack of 8 leading bikes fighting for the win on the final lap. Fenati beat Isaac Vinales for second by just 100th of a second, with Vinales himself leading a photo finish to prove he beat Alex Rins, who crossed the line at exactly the same time. The top 7 runners were separated by just 0.6 of a second. Further back, chaos as Jack Miller was stood up by Miguel Oliveira, taking Alex Marquez down with him in the process. Miller was given 2 penalty points as a result of the crash, going on a cursing tirade at the stewards asking, "Where's the consistency?" Miller won't be too mad though, he still leads the championship by 5 points over Fenati in second, with Alex Rins up to third with 87 points after his awful early form. MotoGP's Mugello weekend gets an 8 out of 10 from me. If I put my casual fan hat on for a minute, it was nice to see Marquez have to fight for a win for once, especially from a resurgent Lorenzo who was back on form after a painfully average season so far. These are the 2 fastest guys the sport has had in the last 5 years, and it was a pleasure to see him go to war once again. As always, check out the Moto3 race. Absolute carnage right from the get-go. And that'll do it for Dre TV episode 9 this week. Just want to make another little thing clear before we go. MotoGP 14 will be on this channel next week, and it will be special because it will be my first ever next generation Let's Play, because I will be playing the PlayStation 4 version of the game. So look forward to that next week. Also as well, if you have any guest segments which you think could fit in on the show, whatever the subject when it comes to Formula 1, MotoGP, or anything else that's vaguely related to the sport, which you feel could make it in this episode, or in any episode of Dre TV, let me know. Send in your links. I'd love to have you on the show. Until then, I've been Harrison101. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Sayonara.